Welcome back to another episode of the Cybersecurity Boardroom. I'm your host, Vince Shoto, and I'm joined by my co-host, T Soul. T, what's going on, man? How you doing? What's going on this week?
Hey, man, I'm living the dream.
Yeah.
It's funny. We were just talking about summer plans. A lot of people have plans to go to concerts and things like that. But you know how that goes. It's so expensive, right? Like,
yeah,
Ticketmaster, they're scalping prices. And they're all
we've
up in the
heard
news.
about that.
Yeah. They're all up in the news lately because they're the government's going after them for anti-monopoly stuff. But
Right.
do you know that they actually got breached recently?
They did?
Last week. Interestingly enough, there was the group called Shiny Hunters, which is a hacking group.
Right.
We're the ones that claimed to leak information about them on the breach forums. It's also on the underground market. Looks like there was about 560 million records released by these guys. 560 million.
Did they specify what type of records it was, or did they just generalize and say it's
they said things like email names, email addresses, partial payment card details, things like that. What's interesting is that they were not required to do a breach notification, but they did. And also they're blaming this on a third party, Snowflake, who is one of their data providers. But Snowflake is saying, hey, it wasn't us. So there's a little bit of pointing fingers going on here.
Has Snowflake provided proof that there wasn't them? Do we know?
I don't know that they provided proof. They provided a statement. I know that, but I don't think there was necessarily proof. So what an interesting predicament to be in as a third-party provider.
Right.
And
constantly preaching the third-party aspect, but this is yet another angle to third party. So if you're third party to an organization that gets breached and they claim that you are a culprit, or you were the part of the cause, just like you need to protect yourself from any type of attack, you need to be able to protect yourself from any type of claim that someone may make. So it's yet another angle to the third party breach scenario that we talk about. It's another reason why you, as a third party to an organization, need to protect yourself. Talk a lot about, hey, you've got third parties in your system and you've got to vet them out and validate and do all that stuff. But we don't really talk about what happens when I'm a third party acting within an environment. How do I protect myself to be able to demonstrate to now my customer, right, that I am not causing any type of vulnerability to them, and be able to demonstrate it with proof points, right, throughout the attack. It's an interesting predicament that they're in. Hopefully they have mechanisms in place, the audit capabilities to be able to demonstrate that it in fact wasn't them. And if it was them, then it is what it is. But if it wasn't and they're not able to prove it, that's a heck of a challenge to be in. And Ticketmaster is really getting it from a couple of perspectives, right? So they've got the lawsuit that the federal government's got on them, as you said, and now they've got this. I mean, this is something that keeps you busy. Also tarnishes reputation in the client eye. So already folks aren't happy with the fact that ticket prices are so high, resale products are even higher. They don't have a favorable, there's not that much of a favorable opinion of them in public eye. And so this does more to tarnish them. The other perspective is, you mentioned that there's partial credit card information that has been exposed. And I always worry about these systems that say, hey, do you want me to store your credit card because it makes transactions easier? Right. I used to say yes all the time because it made it easier. Then I realized, my credit card is just all over the place. And so I started just removing it from everything, because literally of something like this, they may not have, the bad actors may not have all of the credit card details, but if they have some specific details, they'll be able to piecemeal things together. And if they go to another website where that information is not exposed, but they do have the last 4 digits of the credit card number that they're able to match up to what they already have, well, then they have everything else to fill it in. And so it could expose you in other areas as well. So I'd recommend to our listeners and our viewers that if you've got credit card info that's stored in any type of system, you need to really reconsider removing it and just put it in manually every single time. I know it's a little bit more cumbersome to deal with, but the repercussions are a lot greater, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah. And honestly, Vince, I wouldn't. I'm not too mad if Ticketmaster gets exchanged for a more reasonable organization. It'd be nice to buy tickets at a reasonable price.
Yeah, and I don't know about if it's about exchanging them for a more reasonable organization, or having them set some guidelines, having the government set some guidelines to make it a little bit more compelling to work with them, so that it's a little bit more of a fair and equitable exchange when we are purchasing tickets. I look at things that are happening in Europe and the manner in which you can resell tickets. They've got a more of a robust view of how you can conduct those transactions. I know I tried to purchase resale tickets when I went to see a soccer match a couple of years back. The person that was transferring them over to me, they had to transfer it over to my name, and every ticket that I had to be associated to somebody, and there was a limit on how much they could resell it for, how much they could increase the value. And I just thought, as a consumer, it's a lot more fair. But I digress. It's got nothing to do with cyber, but it's the photo opinion of the day, I guess.
Yeah. Speaking of Europe, the BBC, British Broadcasting Corporation, they actually had a breach. Their pensioner scheme was breached. Let me see how many folks were affected by that.
So these are people that are paying into the pension scheme or receiving funds. So pensioners, people that are on their pension that are receiving funds from the pension that they paid into.
This was specifically pensioners. So it looks like 25,000 individuals are affected here. What's interesting about that is that when you think about the demographic of who's collecting a pension currently, these are folks that are not really up to snuff on what's happening in the cyber world in terms of phishing,
right,
and deep fakes and scams like that. And so if these bad actors have already been able to access partial information, and like we were just talking about, putting this together with other sources of information that may not be legal or public facing, they've got almost a dossier on these folks.
Yeah, so, and if you think of it strategically, it's I don't want to say it's a great tactic, but strategically, they are folks that are prime targets because of the fact that they could likely fall for a hoax, whether it's a regular phishing attempt or some of the more complex deep fakes. They are prime candidates for those types of solicitations and potential breaches as they come in. So it's sad to hear, but we need to ensure that we have training that takes place for people of a certain demographic, folks that are on their pension, folks that are a little bit less savvy. The training doesn't just exist or need to take place in the workforce. It needs to take place even when they've left the workforce, because they're still interacting with systems. Right? Very interesting.
Yeah. I'm not sure how much you dabble in the high-end real estate or high-end antiques, Vince, but Christie's
yeah, they call me Antique Vinny. No, I don't do any of that. I have no idea.
Yeah, Christie's auction house, man. They've been getting a lot of heat lately, and so they've been breached recently. They've actually been breached a couple times in the last couple of years.
Right.
But recently, 500,000 records were breached in this most recent one, and this was reported May 9th, I believe, was when this was reported. So pretty recent here, but huge deal. So a ransomware gang, they've got all these folks' information on the dark web, physical addresses, full names, ID document details. Let's see, they gave Christie's 5 days to respond before leaking the data. You know what's interesting about this one is that originally Christie's, they did have a breach, but it was a breach of their client-facing internet web page.
Right.
And you remember, right?
Yeah, and it caught my attention when it did happen. Initially, I was looking and saying, all right, so what? It's an auction house. Who cares? It's just, what's the worst that could happen? They get brought down. They don't run their auctions. But then I started reading into it and realized it's actually a lot more complex. If I am an artist, or if I am an owner of an artifact that I am trying to bring to auction, obviously I want to get the best price that I possibly can. If I suddenly have this perception that I'm not going to get the best price, I could potentially pull my stuff out. The more you pull out, the less the auction is able to bring in. It affects their revenue. It also affects the person that's putting things up for auction. If I do happen to keep it there, a lot of people had a position that there might be some type of recourse for those folks putting things up for auction to go back to Christie's to claim that they didn't get top dollar for their product. So there's that position there. So there could be some litigation that comes out of that. Additionally, the folks that are bidding, in order to be able to bid, my understanding is that they need to provide client information, their banking information. They need to give account numbers, things of that nature. So all of a sudden, that also becomes a risk, because if they've got access to this banking information for people that are likely high net worth individuals or organizations, that's a huge, huge problem, a huge risk for those individuals as well. What's interesting to me is that Christie's, as you said, came out with a statement initially that stated that it was only the client-facing website that just demonstrated what the artifacts were that were to go to auction, and that's all that was compromised. Based on that information, they assured folks that they could continue with the auction because they don't need those systems to be able to conduct the auction, whether it's silent or face-to-face one, and encouraged folks to continue with the process, whether I'm putting up for auction or I am buying for auction. That misinformation has since been corrected or amended to state that there is actually more that was compromised. I said last episode that you got to tell me when you don't know what you don't know. Tell me you don't know what you don't know. That way I can make an informed decision that says whether or not I'm going to place my information and try to bid, or if I'm going to put my product out there in a safe environment.
Yeah. Well, you know, they're getting sued for that very reason. There's a complaint brought to court this Monday, June 3rd, actually.
Okay.
That's one of the things that the plaintiff is alleging. He's saying, hey, you didn't notify us in a reasonable amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
What systems were affected, how this attack was perpetrated, what you've done to respond. You know, none of that's, and that's only part of the complaint. It's actually, it's a pretty extensive complaint. I wouldn't want to be Christie's right now.
Where was the complaint filed? Was it filed in the U.S.?
Texas. Yeah, I think it was Dallas.
Texas.
Yeah.
It's going to be a big challenge for them. And I know they had a record year, I think last year, from a revenue perspective. And this year they're trending a little bit downwards, but that's because it's comparison to a record year. But this could put them at risk, you know, for folks trying to regain that trust, especially since it's happened more than once. Things happen and an organization can be breached more than once. What's important to me, I don't want to say not necessarily that they are breached. You get breached, you know, it's important that we reduce the amount of breaches that take place. But the exactitude of the information that is provided is key. Mm-hmm. Right? And telling folks that there is no problem when in fact there is, and you didn't know enough to be able to make that statement accurately, that's a problem. That's something that we can't stand for. That's something that we need to hold them accountable for. Mm-hmm. If you're going to get breached, it happens. You need to say what it is. And even if it means that you need to postpone an auction, even if it means that it's going to impact your revenue, I think the repercussions in comparison from market perception, right, are far better if you just fess up and just tell people what you know.
Agreed. 100%. Yeah, I mean, this is not the first time for them. Back in 2017, they had an email hacking scam intercepting payments between dealers and clients. I mean, come on now, Christie's. This isn't the first time.
Right. Another one that needs to do better.
Yeah.
Well, all right, T. Those were some pretty interesting topics. Appreciate you bringing them up. I look forward to next week's discussion. I'd like to thank our viewers and listeners. As always, you can follow us on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on YouTube. Please send us your comments, questions, feedbacks. Glad to talk through them. We really want to talk about things that interest folks. And so the more feedback you give us, the more we can provide tailor-made episodes for you. I'd like to thank our sponsors. Once again, Cloud Warriors, they can be reached at cloudwarriors.ai. And with that, T, I wish you a great week. We'll talk next week. And I'd like to make sure everybody stays safe and stay secure.
Sounds good. Take it easy.
All right, man. See ya.